Musinken felt like she had had a long dream, but what happened in the dream was so vague that she couldn't remember it at all. When she woke up from the darkness, she felt a little pain in her head and uncomfortable all over her body. She opened her eyes and looked at the strange ceiling, and the room was dimly yellow. This is where? The ceiling of her room is obviously not of this pattern. She turned her head, and the curtains in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows were blowing in the wind, blowing coolness, but she remembered that there was no such floor-to-ceiling window in her room, not to mention that she would not use such a dark cloth for curtains. It hurts. She tried to sit up, but her head was so painful that she moaned helplessly. She reached out to rub her hand and found that there was a bandage on her forehead. What is wrong with her? How can you get a good night's sleep, but when you wake up, your head is hurt? Didn't she just ran away from home after arguing with her father yesterday and stayed with Lin Su and the others? But this is not Lin Su's home either. The door of the room opened with a click at this moment. Musinken turned his head and wanted to see who the person came in. Before people could see clearly, the familiar low voice came, "Wake up." Without the temperature, she couldn't hear the emotions, which made her frown subconsciously. Who is this person? Just listening to the sound is too annoying. She didn't see his face clearly until he came to the bed and looked at her condescendingly, but she couldn't help but blurt out, "Zhang Jingzi. Why are you here?" The man she called Zhang Jingzi had overly perfect facial features, a pair of oblique phoenix eyes immersed in unidentified emotions, deep to the bottom. Because of her words, the brows were slightly frowned. Musinken had struggled to sit up from the bed, only to realize that she was wearing pajamas. Her heart trembled, and she asked, "Why am I here?" Cheng'er. Zhang Jingzi's phoenix eyes, like deep pools, were full of doubts. She reached out to touch her, but she quickly avoided. Musinken got goosebumps because of his name, so he raised his eyes and glared at him. "Am I familiar with you? What do you call orange? Why am I here? I am obviously following you. Lin Su and the others are together. What did you do to me, Zhang Jingzi?" She hates this man. She hated him from the first time they met, so she couldn't understand why she was here. This is clearly his place. Zhang Jingzi also hesitated to ask because of her words, "You don't remember?" Musinken rolled his eyes at him. "What do I remember? I obviously drank with Lin Su and the others. How did I know that I was here while drinking? My dad asked you to do another good thing, right? I tell you, Zhang Jingzi, don't care about me anymore." Zhang Jingzi's expression was solemn. "Orange, it's 2016 now." "What 2016? It's only 2010. Suddenly, Musinken realized something was wrong. She obviously had pretty short hair, but now she found out that she had long hair. What's the situation? Why did her hair grow overnight? Zhang Jingzi told her even more brazen words, "Orange, this is 2016, our 6th year of marriage." Musinken felt that he must have heard a hallucination, otherwise why would he hear such a joke? In 6 years, more than 2,000 days, she had lived with this man for so long. Apart from thinking that she was crazy, she couldn't think of any other explanation. She felt that she really needed to slow down, otherwise she didn't know how to accept this fact. Zhang Jingzi looked at her as if he was stunned, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. When Musinken reacted, his big palm had touched her face, so gentle, as if he was afraid that she would be touched by him. "It's broken." Musinken frowned and looked at him. She didn't avoid this time, just because she was shocked by the sadness in his eyes. Why should he look at her with such a look? She subconsciously stretched out her hand to caress her heart, not understanding why there was a bit of pain here, and the tingling pain spread from the heart. This feeling is strange to her. She is not used to it or likes it. She opened her mouth, and before she had time to speak, she was suddenly embraced by him. She held it so hard that she was completely close to him. His breath is full of breath, so strange, but it seems so familiar. Cheng'er, Cheng'er. He whispered in a low voice in his ear, and a sentence seemed to penetrate her soul, making her forget that the man who hugged her tightly now is the person she hates most, forget struggling. It wasn't until his warm kiss was printed on her slightly cold lips that she reacted and suddenly pushed him away. She covered her mouth and looked at him with wide-eyed eyes. Although he said that the two of them had been married for 6 years, but now she could not accept his kiss at all. He kissed her, for her, it was like taking advantage of her. Zhang Jingzi still maintained the posture of being pushed away, with unconcealed sadness under his eyes, smiling, but it seemed uglier than crying. Sorry, I can't help but forget that you don't remember anything. Mu Xingqian bit her lower lip, feeling a slight tingling, and then said, I am very confused now, don't you? She didn't know it at first, but her head became muddy after being disrupted by his kiss. Sorry. He apologized again, and stopped approaching or touching her again. Mu Xingqian continued, I want to stay by myself for a while, you go out first. With him, she felt that she couldn't calm down and think about the situation now. Zhang Jingzi nodded slightly, okay, call me again if necessary, I'll be outside. Mu Xingqian didn't answer, he didn't say anything, took a deep look at her and went out, closing the door for her. It was as if Mu Xingqian had exhausted his strength. She sat directly back on the bed softly, staring at the carpet in a daze. She stretched out her hand and stroked the bandage on her head, wondering if she had passed through, or had her memory lost. Mu Xingqian slept and woke up, hoping to have returned to her room as soon as she opened her eyes, but when she opened her eyes, she was disappointed, because the ceiling is still her strange ceiling, and this room is still the same as yesterday. At that time, she was still in Zhang Jingzi's house. She was not so lucky. She couldn't wake up and go back to the past. She sighed slightly and didn't want to move when she lay down. Yesterday, she only felt a pain in her head. Now, she felt that her whole body was aching. She sat up from the bed and opened her pajamas to take a look, only to find that she had bruises on her legs and body. What the is she doing? Could it be that he was raped by Zhang Jing's family? The door of the room opened with a click, and the man she was cursing in her heart appeared. Zhang Jingzi is still Zhang Jingzi. Like the Zhang Jingzi in her impression, he always has an unpredictable face, making people unable to guess what he is thinking. Now he looks more energetic than yesterday. Zhang Jingzi obviously did not expect that she had already woke up, and paused at the door before walking towards her, tentatively asking, Orange? Mu Xingqian gave him an angry look, no need to test, I am still the Mu Xingqian of yesterday, and I am married to your Mu Xingqian for unknown reasons. Zhang Jingzi raised the corner of his mouth, walked over, and gently touched the bandage on her head with his hand, and asked, is it still painful? Mu Xingqian curled his lips and complained, it hurts, it hurts. Why did I get hurt? I still have bruises on my body. Say, did you abuse my family? Faced with the accusation, Zhang Jingzi frowned in astonishment, I won't hurt you. Mu Xingqian snorted, thinking he wouldn't be a scumbag who would do anything to women. But she still has to figure out some things. Then you say, how did I get hurt? You accidentally fell down the stairs yesterday. Zhang Jingzi told her. Mu Xingqian frowned, why would I fall down the stairs? I'm not a big-headed doll, and I can't stand still while walking with light feet. Blam me! He admitted quickly. Mu Xingqian raised his eyebrows and waited for him to follow. You want to grab ice cream from your child, I won't let it, you ran too fast and you fell down the stairs. Zhang Jingzi narrated plainly. Listening to his words, Mu Xingqian's brows were tightly furrowed. How could she grab ice cream from the child? Is she sick? How delicious is this ice cream? Even risking his life to run to grab it. And she is still a 24-year-old woman, and not an 18-year-old girl, how could she do such a stupid thing? And so on. There seems to be something wrong. child. When Musinkan said these two words, she felt a little in her heart. Isn't that what she thinks? Zhang Jingzi nodded, and hadn't spoken yet. The door that hadn't been locked just now was pushed open from the outside, and then there was a soft voice, "Mama." Musinkan saw a Xiao Zhengtai wearing suspenders coming in from the outside, and leaped toward her with a grin. Her head suddenly banged dumbfounded. Is this, calling her numb? Musinkan hurriedly stepped back, far away from the child, with a look of horror pointing to the child who was crying because of her dodge, and asked in a trembling voice, "Zhang Jingzi, you don't tell me, besides marrying you, I also gave birth to you." The amount of information was a little too much, she couldn't come back quickly, and she slept too solidly in this sleep, even the baby was born. "Mama, I am Nianbao, Mama, don't you remember Nianbao?" The child collapsed, and his tearful eyes looked at her pitifully. Musinkan only felt that her scalp was numb, and she never liked children, especially the younger brother born to her stepmother would cry all day long, crying so that she was crazy every day, and even less liked children. Now the child is still looking at her with such accusatory eyes, she can't stand it at all. Zhang Jingzi frowned, picked up the child, kissed his face, leaned against the child's ear and didn't know what was said, maybe it was comforting. The child hugged his neck and buried his entire head between his neck. It's awkward, very pitiful. Musinkan stretched out her hand to cover her chest, feeling too complicated in her heart, she didn't even understand it. After Zhang Jingzi coaxed the child, he raised his eyes and looked at her. What do you think? She thinks? What does she think? She just thought she was going crazy. There was a sudden tingling in her head, which made her cry involuntarily, and knelt on the bed holding her head, her face wrinkled. It hurts. Orange, what's the matter with you? Headache. Zhang Jingzi's expression changed when he saw this. He put down the child and leaned towards her. When he was about to meet her, she slapped his hand away. Don't touch me. She groaned subconsciously, even she herself didn't know why there was so much despair in this tone that people could not ignore. Zhang Jingzi's body stiffened, watching her eyes change instantly, slowly grasping her hands into fists. Musinkan didn't have time to pay attention to his reaction. She only felt that her head was so painful that she was about to explode, as if there was something spinning, but she couldn't see clearly, only knowing that it was getting dizzy and harder. When she was almost unable to hold it, the tingling pain gradually disappeared. And she, as if she had lost her strength, lay down on the bed with a splash. Zhang Jingzi was by her side. He wanted to touch her, but he didn't even dare. He knelt beside her with furrowed brows and looked at her pale as snow, calling her name, Orange. The child also wanted to climb onto the bed, but the bed was too high. He walked on two short legs and couldn't climb up at all. He stood by the bed with an anxious expression. Mama. Musinkan didn't know why she was like this. She had never tried this pain since she was a child. Moreover, the whole world has become something she didn't know. She felt aggrieved and helpless, and her tears were a little uncontrollable. Flowing out of the eyes, it was out of control. Zhang Jingzi's big palm grabbed the bed sheet and struggled for a while. Finally, he bent down and gently hugged the fragile her into his arms, suddenly tightened his arms, and hugged her tightly. I'm here, don't cry. Musinkan had never been so embarrassed before, she actually cried in front of Zhang Jingzi and wet his clothes. Later, she couldn't remember how long she had cried, because she was crying and crying. She was too tired and fell asleep. When she woke up again, she was still in bed, and the night had darkened. Is this another day? There were only two dim lights on the bed, and she was the only one on the bed, and the surroundings were quiet. She remembered those things before, and she pulled the quilt up to cover her face with embarrassment. She really had no face to see people. She doesn't cry. Even if her father married her stepmother and has a new son, she only teaches and doesn't care about her. She doesn't cry, she refuses to bow her head and refuses to subdue. But now when she thinks that she is crying so weakly, it's not like herself anymore. Is it because the hair grows and it becomes feminine? Can't hold back even crying? She sighed slightly, sat up from the bed, looked at her long hair, a little disgusted, and didn't understand why the 24-year-old herself should have long hair. It was bothersome and maddening. Even though she was originally a mother, she thought she was a man, and she didn't know how many girls were so enchanted with her neat short hair. It's really annoying to look like this now. She got out of bed and walked into the bathroom barefoot. After waking up for the first time in the mirror for so long, she finally saw her 24 years old, but she was startled. In the mirror, my cheeks are thin and fleshless, my face is pale, there is no color on his lips, and my head is bandaged. Maybe because I have cried, my eyes are still red. It's such a fragile image, right now. Of her. She didn't know what kind of life she had lived in the past 6 years, how could she ruin herself like this? Even if she has long hair, she still looks malnourished. She doesn't believe that Zhang Jingzi has not abused her. The more she looked at it, the more upset she became. She didn't care. The troublesome hair when she found a hair loop. There was no craftsmanship and the tie was messy. After washing, she went out and opened the closet. At that time, it was another moment. Why are these all skirts? And it's either elegant chiffon or ladies' lace. She feels that this is not her own style at all, and it is impossible for her to wear this kind of clothes in her life. She rummaged it all over, trying to dig out something that looks like jeans, not to mention the jeans, she didn't even find the pants, except for skirts or skirts. In the end, she reluctantly chose a long cotton one-piece dress to wear. She felt uncomfortable without wearing the skirt, but she couldn't help it, she couldn't wear her pajamas all the time. She was glad that the pajamas were not skirts, otherwise she would really go crazy. After waking up for so long, she finally left the room, groping here with the sixth sense, finally came downstairs with great difficulty, finally saw a door leaving the house, and she immediately walked over. When she first touched the doorknob, a deep and mellow voice came from behind, "Orange, where are you going?" She didn't know why, when she heard his voice, she had a shuddering feeling. She trembled all over, and when she turned around, she saw Zhang Jingzi walking towards her. He was carrying the light, she couldn't see his expression a bit, her heart was tight, and she couldn't help but become defensive. Zhang Jingzi came to her and made her see his expression clearly, with worry in her eyes, so she didn't understand why she felt that way just now. She shook her mind. Zhang Jingzi gently stroked her face. "Where are you going?" Musingcan seemed to be accustomed to his touch at this moment, didn't avoid it as angrily as he did at the beginning, but didn't like it much. She took a step back, avoided his touch, curled her lips. "I want to go for a walk." She will feel out of breath for staying in this house all the time. It's getting dark. It's okay, I just want to go out and have a look. She insisted on going out, whether he agreed with it or not. Zhang Jingzi didn't stop her either. "I'll be with you." In fact, she didn't need someone to accompany her at all, especially him. But Musingcan knew that this man did not discuss with her, but was good at making opinions. Just like when he first met, he was obviously very unfamiliar. "I have to worry about her, her cold face is dragged to death." Musingcan pouted her lips, ignored him, and opened the door to go out. She was taken aback as soon as the door opened. On both sides stood 2 burly bodyguards dressed in black suits and sunglasses, and when they saw her coming out, they stopped by her and turned their eyes on her. Musingcan shuddered, the feeling of being stared at was really bad. Zhang Jingzi behind her nodded to the bodyguard, and the bodyguard stepped aside. Musingcan felt that this person was really sick, and that he needed 2 bodyguards to guard him for just one break. Others thought it was a prison if they didn't know it. Besides, it was dark and they were wearing sunglasses. Can these people see clearly? The lights in the yard were turned on and the lights were shining. Musingkan also looked at it quickly. She knew that Zhang Jingzi's house was very big, and there was a swimming pool in the back garden, but the pool was already there. There is no more water. She was a little disappointed. She squatted by the swimming pool and asked him, "Why don't you put water here? I built a swimming pool and didn't put water. Is this going to be used as a garbage dump?" Something flashed in Zhang Jingzi's phoenix eyes, his eyes lowered. "Do you want to swim?" Musingkan nodded seriously, "I think." When she was a child, her mother died early, and her father loved her very much. She always took her to the swimming pool every summer. At first, she was afraid of water, but after months of teaching her father, she fell in love with swimming. In hot weather, she just wanted to soak in the water. Zhang Jingzi said, "I will have someone clean up tomorrow and put in the water." Only then did Musingkan raise the corners of her mouth with satisfaction. After waking up for so long, only this thing went well. At this moment, she thought of her dad, and she was particularly concerned about her. After all, her dad was the person she knew best in her memory, and she was also the closest person to her. At this moment, she wanted to see him. She stood up, looked at Zhang Jingzi in front of her, and asked, "By the way, where is my dad? I want to see him, can you send me back tomorrow?" Zhang Jingzi was silent. When Musingkan saw this, his mood also sank and opened his mouth. For some reason, he suddenly had a bad premonition. "Where's my dad? Zhang Jingzi, why don't you speak?" "My dad?" Musingkan walked up to him, grabbed his collar, and yelled at him with panic in his eyes. This is more panic than when he wakes up to know that he has become his Zhang Jingzi's wife, because that is her father, her only relative. Even if he later married a stepmother and has a new son, that is still her favorite father. Zhang Jingzi gently pressed her into his arms, and a low voice rang in her ear, "Cheng'er, your father, he has been dead for 6 years." Even though she had already had bad expectations, she was still stunned when she really heard this cruel fact. At that moment, her body froze, her head was blank, and she couldn't think of anything. Zhang Jingzi gently stroked her back, "Don't be sad, I'm here, I've always been." Listening to his comforting words, tears always overflowed from his eyes, winding down his cheeks. Musingkan never thought that she would cry in front of this man a second time. She didn't want to be vulnerable, but her father had been dead for 6 years. This was really a big blow to her. She is very strange to this world. She thought that there was still a dad, but now she doesn't even have a dad. Musingkan couldn't remember exactly how she was brought back to the room. She only remembered that she kept crying. No matter how Zhang Jingzi coaxed, her tears could not stop. When she calmed down, she sat on the bed, holding the quilt in a daze. Zhang Jingzi came in with a bowl of noodles in his hand, walked over, and said to her, "Get hungry, eat something first, and sleep well. Tomorrow, I will take you to see your father." Musingkan silently took the chopsticks and the bowl of noodles he handed over, took a few mouthfuls, and couldn't help but look up at him and asked, "Zhang Jingzi, how did my dad die?" She remembered that his body was very healthy 6 years ago. Even if she was always half dead by her anger, he still taught her to be strong. Why did he suddenly pass away? Zhang Jingzi sat on the side of the bed, brought the bowls and chopsticks in her hand, and fed her personally. "Your father committed suicide and jumped off the top floor of the company." Musingkan listened, suffocating in her heart. Suicide? What happened that her father actually committed suicide? Zhang Jingzi glanced at her, and briefly said, "Your father's company has had a lot of problems, and the bigger the basket, he can't remedy it." Musingkan looked at him blankly, and wanted to ask, "Where were you then? Why don't you help him? Are you not partners? Am I your wife then?" But she didn't ask, and finished the bowl of noodles in silence. Her eyes were so bright after hearing that her father had died. Zhang Jingzi provoked her jaw, looking at her with bottomless phoenix eyes. It's all over, don't be too sad. Mu Xingqian smiled bitterly. Indeed, it has been 6 years since her death, and it is too late for her to be sad now. Zhang Jingzi went out carrying the bowls and chopsticks. She was lying on the bed and couldn't sleep. She was in a daze. She didn't even notice when the door opened. Until, the soft sound came from her ear and she shouted. She was surprised to sit up from the bed. The child was lying next to the bed, looking at her pitifully. Mu Xingqian has no experience with children, and never likes children. At the moment, she doesn't know how to react. She sits on the other side of the bed and looks at the child far away. Mama, Mama! The child was struggling to climb onto the bed with his short legs, calling his mother constantly. Although she didn't like it, the child was said to be her own child. Seeing him crawling so hard, she felt a little unbearable. She moved to him, stretched out her hand and pulled him up. The child leaped into her arms happily. Mama, Mama! Nianbao wants to sleep with you. Mu Xingqian froze. The child was soft, warm, and the fleshy little body moved around in her arms. She had never felt it before, completely strange. She really couldn't imagine how she would be. How about giving birth to such a child? When Zhang Jingzi came in, the room was very quiet. He paused, and then lightened his steps. When he came to the bed, he was taken aback for a while, only to see 2 figures lying on the bed, one large and one small. The child lay obediently in Mu Xingqian's arms, and Mu Xingqian was already asleep. Seeing this scene, Zhang Jingzi suddenly stretched out his hand to cover his eyes and raised the corners of his mouth. He was laughing, but tears came out between his fingers. The next day, Mu Xingqian was awakened by the heat. When she opened her eyes, she found a soft heating element on her body, and her short hands and legs stuck to her like an octopus. No wonder she was so hot. She originally wanted to push the child away, but when she saw his sleeping face like an angel, she couldn't move her hands. She stared at his face. The eyelashes are too long, so it makes people jealous. She looked at his fleshy little face again. Even if she closed her eyes, she could still see her shadow, and Zhang Jingzi's shadow on his little face. This shows that this child is really their child. Yesterday, she didn't take a close look. Today, she saw the child seriously. She was in a complicated mood. After all, she only has the memory of 18 years old and is not ready to be a mother. How will she get along with this child in the future? In fact, the biggest problem is how to get along with Zhang Jingzi. She didn't get along well before. She didn't think she could get along well with him in the future. As long as she thought of the future, she would panic. All kinds of unknowns, plus, she is now I still don't know what the world is like. I only found out yesterday that my father was gone, so what happened? The only one who can give her the answer is Zhang Jingzi. She didn't want to cling to him and rely on him, but now, it seemed that besides her, she didn't know who to rely on. Woke up. She was still in a daze. She didn't know when Zhang Jingzi came in. She pointed to the child in her arms and asked him to hug him away. She maintained this position for a long time, and it was numb for a long time. Zhang Jingzi raised the corner of his mouth, and the phoenix eyes were full of smiles. He gently hugged his son in his arms and asked him to sleep on his shoulders, while his smiling eyes fell on his seat. Mu Xingqian rubbed his arm. Orange, good morning. Zhang Jingzi really hates it. Mu Xingqian is already sitting at the dining table downstairs, biting the spoon and looking at the back of the busy man in the open kitchen. Even if he makes breakfast for her, she still thinks he hates him. She did it early in the morning. Why should I smile at her? Didn't he always frown when he saw her before? As if she owed him millions, she suddenly smiled at her now. She was not used to it. How has she lived with him in the past 6 years? I am afraid this has become an unsolved mystery. Mama! Musinkan is still in a daze. I don't know when, the child has already come to her, lying on her lap and looking at her with his head up. Mama, I am Nianbao. Musinkan became stiff, and she is still not used to being intimate with her children. Oh, hello, Nianbao. Nianbao is your son. The child was a little wronged with a flat mouth. Oh, hello son. Musinkan was a little flustered when he saw him like this, and remembered the picture of the brother who was born to his stepmother crying every day. The cheap brother cried so much that she wanted to beat someone, but the real son in front of him was crying. She couldn't beat someone, right? Nianbao wants mama hug, Nianbao wants mama kiss. Musinkan looked at the little baby struggling to climb on her lap, feeling at a loss. She is only 18 years old and she is still a child. Who can tell her how to take care of the child? Zhang Jingzi came out to save her. He took the cooked spaghetti and put it on the dinner table, then walked over, picked up his son who was still crawling on her lap, kissed his face, and put him on the table. His exclusive position. Hey, let your mother eat breakfast first, don't pester her. The child pouted, unhappy, but also obediently, eating his own breakfast while peeking at Musinkan. Zhang Jingzi picked up some spaghetti and put it in a bowl, and handed it to her. Eat it. Musinkan was indeed hungry. After waking up for so long, it was just that bowl of noodles last night. She took a bite, and her eyes suddenly brightened. Unexpectedly, Zhang Jingzi's cooking skills are quite good, very delicious, and she likes to eat spaghetti with meat sauce, sour and very appetizing. Does Zhang Jingzi know what she likes to eat? She couldn't help but raised her eyes and glanced at him, and saw that he was staring at her all the time, but the light was so confusing, she didn't know what he was thinking. Zhang Jingzi returned to his senses and asked, "Is it delicious?" Musinkan snorted, not wanting to give him face, so she didn't say it was delicious. Zhang Jingzi raised the corners of his mouth, and was not angry. He seemed to be in a good mood, so Musinkan was very depressed. Why is he so patient with her now? If in the past, he had pulled down his face and taught her, he was obviously not hers, but he always interfered with her and took care of her. Oh, yes, it was her father who gave him this power at that time. Thinking of her dad, she wilted again. Dad is no longer there. After breakfast, Zhang Jingzi asked the bodyguard to send the child to school, and he said to Musinkan, "I will take you to see your father." On the way to the cemetery, Musinkan didn't know how to describe her feelings. Her father had passed away for 6 years. If she was 24, she would have accepted this fact and would no longer have such a sad feeling. Right? But she only has the memory of 18 years old. She had just finished arguing with her father a few days ago, and now she must accept the fact that he has passed away. It is really difficult for her to be sad. On the way here, she bought a bunch of gypsophila and followed Zhang Jingzi to her father's grave. When she saw the photo on the tombstone, her eyes were flooded with tears, standing still holding flowers and pursing her lips stubbornly not wanting to cry. Zhang Jingzi stood beside her with his hands in his pockets. Seeing her tears, he stretched out his hands and gently hugged her shoulders. If at other times, Musinkan would definitely push his hand away, so as not to take advantage of him, but at this moment, when she was most vulnerable, she did not want to push him away, and even took the initiative to embrace him. Rely on it. Because, besides relying on him, she doesn't know who to rely on now. Leaving the cemetery, she was jealous, but she stopped crying. Whether she accepts it or not, facts are facts, and now is not the time for her to be sad. At this time, she should think about the future, and she must have a serious talk with him about the man in her future. Zhang Jingzi took her to dinner. Along the way, she looked out the window of the car and found that the city she used to be familiar with seemed to have become a little less familiar to her, just like she was filled with confusion about the world. Zhang Jingzi took her to Pinyuan. What surprised her was that after so many years, Pin Yuan was exactly the same as before. This made her feel a little familiar and not so flustered. She still remembers that the first time she saw Zhang Jingzi was in Pin Yuan. At that time, the relationship between her and her dad was very tense, because his little wife had just given birth to a son for him. She felt that his care for himself was given to his younger son, and she was like a child that no one wanted. Is to make something to get his attention. That day was the dinner between my dad and Zhang Jingzi. The two were business partners. Even though they had a difference in age, they seemed to have a good relationship with one another. Otherwise, Zhang Jingzi would not have been such a at the time. Her father asked him to help take care of her, so he really took care of her. Obviously it seems to have just happened, but for others, it has been 6 years. What are you thinking? The two of them sat in the box, and Zhang Jingzi poured her a cup of tea, which was fragrant. Only then did Musinkan regained consciousness, raised her eyes to look at him, cleared her throat, and said, Zhang Jingzi, I think we should have a good talk.